The unexpected inheritance. The space station Orion 9 floated in the endless blackness of space. It was a lonely place, orbiting a dying planet. For Ethan Graves, it was just another work shift. A human engineer, fixing broken machines, running system checks. Nothing exciting ever happened here. Until tonight, a sudden emergency alert flashed across the station's control panel. Urgent distress signal detected. Source: unknown alien ship. Status: critical. Ethan frowned. Most distress signals in space meant one thing: trouble. Pirates, lost travelers, or something worse. He hesitated, then sighed. Ignoring an emergency call was against intergalactic law. He tapped the screen, opening communication. Static filled the speakers. Then, a deep, weak voice spoke. "Human, you must listen. I am dying, and my legacy must not end." Ethan leaned closer. Legacy? What legacy? Come. To coordinates. 42 Kappa 7. Hurry. And then silence. Ethan stared at the screen. The signal was coming from a ship not far from the station. The logical choice. Ignore it. Stay safe. But something about that voice. It wasn't just a call for help. It was a demand. He had to go. The alien's last words. Minutes later, Ethan's small shuttle docked with the unknown ship. The exterior was ancient, covered in battle scars and glowing symbols. The doors slid open with a mechanical hiss, revealing a dark, empty corridor. Ethan stepped inside, his boots echoing in the silence. The air smelled metallic, heavy with the scent of something old, dying. And then he saw him. A massive alien warrior lay slumped against a console. His silver-blue skin was cracked, his breathing shallow. His armor, once majestic, was now broken. A dark liquid, his blood, pooled beneath him. The alien's eyes flickered open. "You came. Good." Ethan crouched beside him. "What happened to you?" The alien coughed, a painful sound. "Betrayed. Poisoned. No time." His trembling hand reached for a metal tablet-like device on his chest. He pressed it weakly. The screen flickered, revealing a contract written in an alien script. Then, to Ethan's horror, the letters shifted into English. "By accepting this inheritance, you claim ownership of all bonded assets of War Chief Salfar. This includes his titles, lands, and YVs." Ethan blinked. "Wait. What?" "Hold on," he stammered, stepping back. "Wives? I don't. I think there's been a mistake." The alien warrior grabbed Ethan's wrist with surprising strength. "No mistake. It must be you. No other choice. They are yours now. Protect them." Ethan's heart pounded. Who was they? Why was he being chosen? The alien's grip loosened. His head tilted back. His chest stopped moving. Silence. War Chief Salfar was dead, and Ethan had just inherited something he didn't understand. The arrival of the wives. Before Ethan could process what had just happened, the ship's alarms blared. A voice, smooth but firm, echoed through the ship. "New bond detected. Confirming inheritance. Welcome, Ethan Graves." His stomach twisted. No. This was not happening. He turned, ready to run back to his shuttle, when the doors behind him locked. The ship's lights flickered as two figures stepped into the room. Two alien women. One was tall and elegant, her long dark hair flowing behind her like silk. Her piercing violet eyes studied him with quiet intensity. She wore a deep blue robe, decorated with golden patterns that shimmered as she moved. The other was shorter, wilder, with sharp emerald eyes and a smirk that sent chills down Ethan's spine. Her armor was sleek, her movements quick and unpredictable. The taller one spoke first, her voice smooth as glass. "So, you are the one he chose." Ethan swallowed hard. "Look, I don't know what's going on here, but—" The second woman interrupted, stepping dangerously close. "You don't get it, Do you? This isn't a joke, human. You are ours now. Ethan froze. Before he could react, the ship lurched forward, engines roaring to life. The console displayed a warning. Hostile forces detected. Evacuation in progress. The taller wife turned to Ethan, her expression unreadable. You better learn fast, human. Because if you fail, we all die. Ethan had a terrible feeling. He was in way over his head. The alien wives and their deadly secret. The ship lurched forward at impossible speed, the engines roaring like a beast waking from slumber. Ethan barely kept his balance as the entire structure vibrated beneath him. The taller alien woman, the one with the regal air and piercing violet eyes, moved toward the control panel without hesitation. With a flick of her fingers, glowing symbols formed in the air, responding to her commands. The second woman, the wild one, stood with arms crossed, watching Ethan like a predator observing prey. So, husband, she said with a smirk, are you ready to die yet? Ethan's pulse pounded. Husband, all right, listen, he snapped, rubbing his temples. I don't know what kind of twisted alien law this is, but I did not sign up for. Yes, you did. The taller woman turned to him, her voice calm but firm. When you accepted Salfar's inheritance, you accepted everything. His rank, his responsibilities, and us. Ethan's breath caught. This is some kind of cultural thing, right? Some symbolic tradition. The wild one laughed, shaking her head. Oh, you poor thing. You really have no idea what you've done, do you? Before Ethan could respond, the ship's warning alarms blared again. Hostile forces approaching. 5 enemy ships detected. The tall woman clenched her jaw. They found us. Who? Ethan demanded. She turned her violet eyes to him, unreadable. The ones who killed Salfar. A dangerous inheritance. Ethan's stomach twisted. This wasn't just about an inheritance. It was a death sentence. The regal woman moved to the ship's weapons console, her fingers dancing over holographic controls. Ethan's panic rose. Hold on, he shouted. Can someone explain what's happening? Who are you people? Why are we being chased? The wild one cracked her knuckles, stepping closer to him. Fine. You want the truth. Here it is. She jabbed a finger at his chest. Zalthar wasn't just some dying warrior. He was the High Commander of the Orvec Dominion, one of the most feared warlords in the galaxy. Ethan's mouth went dry. And we, she continued, are his bonded queens. The taller one nodded, which means you are now the acting leader of his dominion. Ethan stared at them in disbelief. A warlord? A dominion? A fleet of enemies hunting them down. This wasn't just some inheritance. This was a throne covered in blood. But I'm just an engineer, he muttered. I fix things. I don't. I can't. Then you will die, the regal woman said flatly. Her tone wasn't cruel, just factual. Ethan ran a shaking hand through his hair. So what? I'm just supposed to take his place, command his armies, lead his people. No. The wild one grinned, showing sharp teeth. You just have to survive long enough to make a choice. Ethan frowned. What choice? To rule or to run? The ship shuddered as the enemy vessels locked onto them. The assassins arrive. Ethan barely had time to process this before the ship was boarded. A loud metallic clang echoed through the corridors, followed by the hiss of an airlock breach. They're inside, the regal wife announced, her expression finally breaking into something that looked like urgency. Ethan spun around, heart pounding. Who's inside? Assassins. The wild one was already moving, pulling out a sleek, glowing blade from her belt. If you want to live, stay behind me. Ethan had no weapons, no armor, no battle training. He was completely useless. The doors to the chamber slammed open. A group of 4 armored figures stepped in, their weapons humming with deadly energy. Their faces were hidden behind smooth, featureless helmets, but their movements were sharp, efficient. They were professionals. One of them raised a weapon, a sleek, futuristic firearm, and aimed directly at Ethan's head. His body went rigid. This is it. This is how I die. But before the assassin could fire, the wild wife vanished. No, not vanished, moved. Faster than Ethan's brain could process, she was on top of the assassin, her glowing blade slicing through armor like paper. The assassin's weapon clattered to the ground. Their body collapsed. Ethan staggered back. The wild wife turned her head toward him, her eyes burning with excitement. "Stay close, husband. The fun is just beginning." Another assassin lunged forward, but the regal wife stepped between them, moving with elegant precision. With a single flick of her wrist, she sent a wave of purple energy crackling through the air. The assassin froze mid-attack, their body locking up as if trapped in invisible chains. She turned her head slightly toward Ethan. "Now you see why we were worth inheriting." Ethan had no words. The assassins were dying like insects. These women were not just wives. They were weapons. And for some reason, they were his. The aftermath and a dark warning. Minutes later, the last assassin fell. The ship was silent again. The air smelled of burned metal and blood. Ethan felt like throwing up. His hands were shaking. You killed them," he whispered. The wild one wiped her blade clean. "They would have killed you first. Welcome to your new life, husband." The regal one nodded. "This was only the beginning. More will come. Stronger ones. If you are to survive, you must choose." Ethan gulped. "Choose what?" She turned, violet eyes glowing. "To claim Atalfar's throne, or to run and die as a coward." The ship's warning lights flickered. A new distress signal had just arrived. Ethan clenched his fists. This was real. This was happening. And somehow, in the middle of it all, he was supposed to be the new warlord. But he had a terrible feeling. This inheritance wasn't a gift. It was a curse. The assassin's arrival. The air inside the ship was thick with the scent of burned metal and death. Ethan's heart was still racing. He had seen people die before. Accidents in deep space engineering, a few fatal encounters with pirates, but never like this. Not up close. Not by the hands of two women who were now his wives. His stomach churned as he stared at the lifeless bodies of the assassins. Their smooth, featureless helmets reflected the dim blue glow of the ship's control panels. "We need to move." The regal wife, her violet eyes calm and unreadable, turned away from the bodies as if they were inconsequential. Ethan, still in shock, swallowed hard. Who the hell were they? "A test," the wild one said, wiping her blade clean. "And you passed, husband. You're still breathing." Ethan wasn't so sure about that. His lungs felt tight. His brain was struggling to process everything. The assassins had come for him, which meant this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The true enemy revealed. Before Ethan could gather his thoughts, the ship's alarms blared again. Incoming vessel detected. Class. Warship. Identification. Unknown. Ethan barely had time to react before the entire ship lurched violently. The walls trembled, metal groaning under the force of something massive. A tractor beam. They were being pulled in. The regal wife. Ethan was beginning to think of her as the queen, moved swiftly to the controls. Her fingers danced over the glowing symbols, trying to override the lock. But the system flashed red. "They're overriding our defenses," she said, her voice tighter than before. "Whoever this is, they're not just bounty hunters." Ethan stepped closer, his panic rising. "Then who are they?" "The wild one. Let's call her the warrior," snorted. "You're about to find out." Boarding the warship, a blinding flash of light swallowed them. For a moment, Ethan felt like he was being ripped apart, his body stretched thin across space. Then, suddenly, he was somewhere else. The ship around him had changed. The cold metal floor beneath him was different, the air heavier. He blinked rapidly, his vision adjusting. They had been teleported. Ethan stood inside a dark, cavernous hall. Strange, glowing structures lined the walls. Alien technology humming with unnatural energy. The ceiling stretched high, disappearing into shadows. It felt like standing inside the belly of some great, sleeping beast. The Queen and the warrior were beside him, their bodies tensed like coiled springs. And then, footsteps. A figure emerged from the darkness. Tall, towering, a being of pure obsidian black armor, its face hidden behind a jagged mask. Its very presence seemed to bend the air, like gravity itself was weaker around it. The temperature in the room dropped. Ethan felt his skin prickle as the figure stepped forward, its voice like thunder rolling across the void. So, the human lives. The commander of the Black Fleet. The Queen bowed her head slightly, not in submission, but in acknowledgement. "Lord Varzun," she said, "I should have known you were behind this." The name meant nothing to Ethan. But the way she said it, the way her usually unreadable voice held a sharp edge, told him everything. This was a man to be feared. Lord Varzun's eyes, two piercing white lights beneath his mask, settled on Ethan. "You are no Xalfar," he said, his tone almost amused. "And yet, you wear his crown." Ethan's fists clenched. "I didn't ask for this." Varzun laughed, a deep, rumbling sound that sent shivers down Ethan's spine. "No one does." The Queen stepped forward. "If you wanted him dead, you would have let the assassins finish their work. Why bring us here?" Varzun tilted his head slightly, as if considering the question. Then his voice turned cold. "Because the assassins were not mine." Silence. Ethan's breath caught. "What?" "Someone else sent them," Varzun continued. "Someone who does not wish to see a new war chief rise." The warrior's grip tightened around her weapon. "Who?" Varzun took another step closer, his gaze never leaving Ethan. "Your predecessor had many enemies. You have inherited them all." Ethan exhaled sharply. Of course. Xalfar wasn't just some random warrior. He was a leader, a conqueror, a king among warlords. And kings make enemies. Varzun's white eyes narrowed. "I have a proposition, human." Ethan swallowed. "I'm listening." "Xalfar and I were rivals once, but we shared a greater enemy. An enemy that has already marked you for death." The Queen's violet eyes darkened. "You mean the Hollow Syndicate?" Ethan's heart skipped a beat. The Hollow Syndicate. Even in human space, that name was whispered in fear. A vast, secretive network of warlords, assassins, and corrupted factions. A shadow empire that thrived in the darkest corners of the galaxy. And they wanted him dead. A deadly choice. Varzun turned, walking toward a massive viewport at the end of the hall. Beyond the glass, Ethan saw something vast. An armada. Hundreds of warships, their sleek black hulls gleaming under the light of a dying star. Varzun raised a hand toward the fleet. "Swear fealty to me, human, and I will protect you. Together, we will crush the Hollow Syndicate before they consume us all." Ethan felt his throat go dry. "And if I refuse?" Varzun turned his masked face toward him, his answer as cold as the void. "Then you will die screaming, just as Xalfar did." A heavy silence fell over the room. The Queen and the warrior watched Ethan carefully. They had seen him hesitate before. But this was different. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about power. Ethan looked out at the fleet, at the countless warships waiting in silence, at the shadow of a war that was growing ever closer. He had a choice to make: to become the hunted, or to become something far worse. The forgotten war and MC's role. The silence in the warship's command chamber was heavy, almost suffocating. Ethan stared out at the vast fleet beyond the viewport. Hundreds of warships, each the size of a city, waiting in the cold expanse of space. Their dark, gleaming hulls reflected the dim glow of a dying red star. And behind him, Varzun, Lord of the Black Fleet, waited for an answer. "Swear fealty to me, human," Varzun repeated, his deep, rumbling voice like distant thunder. "And I will protect you. Together, we will crush the Hollow Syndicate before they consume us all." Ethan's throat was dry. His pulse pounded in his ears. He turned his gaze toward the two alien wives who now stood beside him. The Queen, calm, calculating, and unreadable. Her violet eyes studied him like a chess piece on a galactic board. The warrior, wild, dangerous, her body tensed like a coiled spring waiting for his choice. They had called this an inheritance, but it was starting to feel like a trap. "Why me?" Ethan finally asked, voice hoarse. Varzun tilted his helmeted head. "Because you are all that remains." Ethan clenched his fists. "I don't even know what I'm inheriting." Varzun's glowing white eyes narrowed. "Then it is time you learned the truth about Salfar's war. The war that never ended." A soft hum filled the room as Varzun gestured toward the central console. A holographic map of the galaxy flickered to life, a vast, swirling spiral of stars and nebulas. But unlike human maps, this one was fractured, marked with regions of fire and blood. 1,000 cycles ago, Varzun began. This war should have ended, but it didn't. Ethan watched as the hologram zoomed in on a distant sector, one marked with a symbol he didn't recognize. The Hollow Syndicate was once a minor power, a hidden cartel of smugglers and assassins, but they learned a secret, one that turned them into something far worse. The hologram shifted, showing something that made Ethan's skin crawl. A planet, or rather, what remained of one. A massive jagged scar cut across its surface, as if something had ripped through its core. Not destroyed. Consumed. They found a way to harvest something ancient, something that should have never been awakened. Ethan stepped closer, his stomach twisting. "What are you saying?" Varzun's voice was lower now, almost a whisper. "The Hollow Syndicate is no longer just a syndicate. They are hosts, parasites. Their leaders are not entirely their own anymore." Ethan's skin went cold. "What the hell does that mean?" The Queen, for the first time, looked uneasy. "It means," she said softly, "that the war was never between Zalfar and the Syndicate. It was between us, and what is inside them. And now, human," Varzun said, "you have inherited Zalfar's fight against them. The burden of a dead warlord." Ethan staggered back, rubbing his temples. This was too much. He had gone from a simple engineer to a target in a war that should have ended centuries ago. His mind was screaming, "Run. Get out. Go back to Earth." But there was no going back, was there? Zalfar had chosen him for a reason. Ethan forced himself to breathe. He turned to Varzun. "What exactly did I inherit?" The Queen's voice was sharp. "A throne. A fleet. A war you cannot run from." The warrior smirked. "And of course, us." Ethan ignored her. "And what happens if I refuse?" Varzun was silent for a moment. Then, in a voice like ice, "Then the Syndicate will find you first, and they will not kill you. They will take you." The word sent a shiver down Ethan's spine. He knew what Varzun meant. Possession. Corruption. Whatever had taken the Syndicate's leaders, it wanted him next. The choice, to rule or to run. Ethan turned back toward the holographic map. His mind raced. Option 1. Swear fealty to Varzun. Take command of Zalfar's forces. Join the war. Option 2. Run. Hide. Try to escape the inevitable. He looked at the Queen. She was watching him closely. "You want me to accept this, don't you?" he asked. She didn't blink. "I want you to survive. And this is the only way." Ethan turned to the warrior. "And you? Do you think I can actually do this?" She grinned. "Oh, I don't care if you can or can't. I just want to see how many of them you can kill before you die." Ethan exhaled slowly. Then he looked at Varzun. I'm not a warlord. You are now, Varzun said. Ethan clenched his jaw. Fine. He stepped forward. I accept. Varzun gave a slow nod. Then let the war begin. The coronation of a reluctant king. The moment Ethan spoke the words, a massive surge of energy pulsed through the warship. The fleet outside shifted, their dark hulls glowing with renewed power. They had a new commander now. Ethan barely had time to process it before something cold and ancient coiled around his mind. A connection. A bond. His inheritance wasn't just titles and ships. It was memories. A flood of Salfar's past slammed into his brain. Battles, betrayals, victories soaked in blood. The screams of dying worlds. The weight of command. Ethan's legs buckled under the sheer force of it. His vision blurred. His heartbeat roared in his ears. He saw it. The thing inside the hollow syndicate. It was awake. And it knew his name. The betrayal within. The moment Ethan accepted his inheritance, something changed. It wasn't just the warships outside, adjusting their formation in silent acknowledgement of their new commander. It wasn't just Varzun, watching him with those cold, glowing white eyes. It was something inside him, like a switch had flipped. The moment he spoke the words, I accept, an invisible force wrapped around his mind, something ancient and heavy. Memories that weren't his flooded in, battlefields soaked in alien blood, empires burning in the dark, the agonizing weight of command. For a brief second, he felt Salfar's final thoughts. They will betray you. Ethan's breath caught. He staggered back, clutching his skull as the echoes of a dead warlord's warnings rang in his head. The Queen was at his side in an instant, her violet eyes studying him. What did you see? Ethan opened his mouth to speak, then hesitated. What did I just feel? The first signs of treachery. Varzun's voice pulled him back to the present. The fleet awaits your command, human. Ethan straightened, still feeling the weight of unseen chains pressing against his skull. He looked at the Queen and the warrior. For the first time, a terrible thought crept into his mind. What if one of them is the betrayer? Zalfar's memories weren't clear, just shadows and whispers of deception, a warning. But who? Ethan swallowed hard. We need to get out of here, he said, pushing his paranoia aside. If the Hollow Syndicate really sent those assassins, they'll keep coming. Varzun gave a slow nod. Agreed. But the question is, where will you go? The Queen's expression was calm, but there was a slight hesitation in her voice. I have an idea. A secret meeting on a dead moon. Hours later, Ethan found himself aboard a sleek warship heading toward a distant, desolate moon, one that had been abandoned for centuries. The Queen sat across from him, hands folded neatly in her lap. The warrior stood, arms crossed, watching him with that ever-present smirk. Ethan turned toward the Queen. Why are we going here? She met his gaze evenly. Because if you are to survive, you will need allies, and there is only one place left where we might find them. Ethan didn't like the sound of that. And what exactly is this place? The Queen's voice was quiet. It is a place where warlords go to die. The warrior grinned. Oh, this is going to be fun. Ethan wasn't so sure. The gathering of the dead. The ship landed on the surface of the dead moon, the landscape barren and lifeless. But beneath the surface, hidden in the ruins of an ancient war, was a sanctuary, a place where fallen rulers, exiled commanders, and fugitives of war gathered in the shadows. Ethan followed the Queen through the crumbling halls of the underground stronghold. The air was thick with the scent of dust and lost history. They entered a massive chamber. Dozens of figures turned to look at them. Some were aliens, their bodies scarred from wars long forgotten. Some were humans, deserters from failed empires. And at the center, sitting on a throne of metal salvaged from the wreckage of dead ships, was an old warlord with glowing red eyes. His voice was like a storm rolling over mountains. "You should not have come here, Queen." Ethan's spine stiffened. Queen. She had never told him she was an actual ruler. The warrior, sensing Ethan's surprise, grinned. "Oh, did she forget to tell you? Our dear wife wasn't just Uxalfar's bride. She was his equal." Ethan slowly turned to look at her. The queen met his gaze without flinching. "There are many things you do not know, Ethan." His chest tightened. That was the problem, wasn't it? He didn't know anything. He had been thrown into a ward he didn't understand, given a throne he didn't want, surrounded by people who refused to tell him the whole truth. And now he was standing in a room full of exiled warlords, all of whom were looking at him with various degrees of curiosity and suspicion. "Why are you here, Queen?" the old warlord demanded. "And why have you brought a human?" The queen exhaled softly. "Because the Hollow Syndicate is rising again, and because this human is Salfar's successor." A silence fell over the chamber. Then, laughter. Loud, mocking laughter. "A human?" One of the warlords sneered. "Zalfar's empire is reduced to this. This is an insult." Another spat. "This war is already lost." Ethan clenched his fists. His jaw tightened. He wasn't sure what he had been expecting, but he should have known better. No one was going to follow him. The hidden betrayer. As the warlords argued among themselves, Ethan became aware of something. A feeling. That same whispering warning from before. "They will betray you." His eyes flicked across the room. His wives stood close, too close. He had trusted them in battle, but now, something wasn't right. Then, he noticed it. A flicker of movement. One of the warlords was quietly reaching for a weapon. Not aimed at Ethan. Aimed at the queen. Ethan moved before he could think. He lunged forward, grabbing the queen by the arm, just as the assassin struck. A blade, razor sharp and coated in something dark and unnatural, sliced through empty air where the queen had just been standing. The room erupted in chaos. The warrior was already in motion, her own blade clashing against the assassin's. The old warlord's red eyes flared. "Traitor!" The assassins snarled, throwing off their hood. A Hollow Syndicate mark burned into their skin. Ethan's blood ran cold. They had been betrayed. The escape and a hard truth. The fight was quick and brutal. The assassin was cut down, but the damage was done. "They knew we were coming," the queen said, wiping blood from her sleeve. "Which means someone told them." Ethan's stomach twisted. He looked around the room at the warlords, then at his wives. Who had betrayed them? The warrior was watching him, a strange look in her eyes. The queen's hands were steady, but were they too steady? Someone had sold them out, and Ethan had no idea who to trust anymore. The last stand, and the ultimate choice. The scent of burned metal and blood filled the air. The hidden warlord sanctuary was no longer a place of refuge. It had become a battlefield. Ethan stood in the center of it all, his pulse hammering in his skull. The assassin who had tried to kill the queen lay dead, but the damage was already done. "They knew we were coming." The queen's voice was quiet, but there was a sharp edge to it, which means someone told them. Ethan scanned the room. Who betrayed them? The warlords stood frozen, tense, their weapons drawn. Mistrust filled the air like poison. The queen stood still, her violet eyes sharp, calculating. Had she known more than she was letting on? The warrior was gripping her blade tightly, her body thrumming with energy, ready to kill again. But was she hiding something? Varzun, the dark warlord, observed everything in silence, his glowing white eyes unreadable. Someone had sold them out to the Hollow Syndicate, and Ethan needed to find out who before it was too late. The incoming storm. Before Ethan could process anything further, the ground beneath them shook violently. "Proximity alert," a warlord shouted. "Multiple ships inbound." Ethan's heart clenched. It's them. Outside the underground sanctuary, Ships were descending from the sky. Black, insect-like war vessels, each adorned with the twisted insignia of the Hollow Syndicate. The Queen's face was grim. "We've been cornered." Ethan clenched his fists. "Then we fight." Varzun finally spoke. "No." His voice was like distant thunder. "We do not fight. We survive." ***. The warrior grinned. "Survive. I was hoping we'd kill a few more before we ran." Varzun ignored her, turning to Ethan. "This is your first test, human. The true warlord knows when to stand and when to fall back." Ethan's mind raced. What was the right move? Stay and fight. They were outnumbered. Run, but to where? And worse, someone in this room was a traitor. He didn't just need to escape. He needed to find out who had sold them out. The battle for the sanctuary. The first shockwave from the Syndicate's bombardment hit the sanctuary like a hammer. Walls cracked. Fires erupted. The warlords scattered, drawing weapons, barking orders. Ethan ducked as a blast of energy tore through the ceiling. They weren't just being captured. They were being wiped out. The warrior leaped into the chaos, slicing through Syndicate soldiers like a storm of steel. The Queen moved like a shadow, her fingers glowing as she unleashed waves of deadly violet energy. Ethan? He was trying not to die. His instincts screamed at him to run, but a single thought kept him in place. If I run now, I will never stop running. Vizalfar hadn't run. He had stood his ground. He had built an empire. And now, that empire belonged to Ethan. I need to lead. Ethan grabbed the nearest fallen soldier's pulse rifle and took cover. He turned toward Varzun, who was standing completely still in the chaos, watching him. If you're waiting for me to prove myself, now's the time, Ethan shouted. Varzun tilted his head, considering. Then, for the first time, he smiled. Then lead, warlord. Ethan took a deep breath. All right. Time to stop being afraid. The grand deception. Betrayer revealed. The battle raged around them, but something wasn't right. Ethan noticed patterns. Certain soldiers weren't attacking the Queen or warrior. Some Syndicate assassins seemed to be avoiding specific people. Someone was working with them. Ethan's eyes flicked toward the Queen. Was it her? Then to the warrior. Was she the one who called the assassins? Then to Varzun. Could he be playing a deeper game? He had no proof. No time. But something inside him, Zalfar's instincts, Maeve, was screaming. You already know who it is. Then it happened. A single mistake. One of the warlords, an alien with pale, scared skin, moved too quickly. Too deliberately. Cover the Queen, the warlord shouted. We need to protect her. Ethan's mind snapped into place. The assassin had attacked the Queen first. The Syndicate soldiers were avoiding her. And now someone was trying too hard to defend her. Ethan didn't hesitate. He raised his pulse rifle and fired. The scared warlord collapsed, clutching his side. Everyone froze. The Queen's violet eyes widened. The warrior grinned. Oh, now this just got interesting. The wounded warlord snarled, spitting blood. You fool. Ethan stepped forward, his pulse pounding. You were the one who betrayed us. The warlord laughed. A sick, twisted sound. It doesn't matter, human. You're already dead. The ground beneath them exploded. The ultimate choice, warlord or survivor. Ethan hit the ground hard. His ears rang, his vision blurring. The entire sanctuary was collapsing. Syndicate reinforcements were flooding in. Varzun grabbed him by the collar, pulling him up. We need to go. Now. Ethan's heart was pounding. The Queen and warrior were still fighting, but the battle was lost. He had one last choice. Flee now with Varzun and his fleet. Secure his power, regroup, strike back later. Stay and fight with the Queen and warrior. Risk everything. Prove he was a real leader. The weight of command pressed down on him. Make a choice, Ethan. Are you a warlord? The queen turned to him, her gaze intense. "We need you." The warrior grinned through the blood. "If you leave, I'll kill you myself." Varzun's voice was cold. "Decide, human, power or loyalty." The syndicate's ships were coming. This was it. Ethan clenched his fists. His next words would change the fate of the war. He took a deep breath. And he chose. A new fate. The war begins. The choice hung in the air like a blade suspended between life and death. The ground beneath Ethan shook violently, explosions ripping through the collapsing sanctuary. The hollow syndicate's warships hovered above, black as the void, their cannons primed to reduce everything to dust. The queen stood before him, her violet eyes filled with silent expectation. She had been his guide in this war, but also, perhaps, his greatest manipulator. The warrior grinned through the blood on her face, eyes gleaming with battle lust. She was fearless, reckless, but utterly loyal, if only to the thrill of destruction. Varzun loomed over him, dark and imposing, the cold warlord who had offered him power and an army, but demanded submission in return. And the syndicate was closing in. Ethan had one moment to decide. Would he flee and return stronger, or stand his ground and fight? He clenched his fists. The weight of Zalfar's empire, the throne, the war, it all pressed down on his shoulders. But then, a single thought cut through the noise. Zalfar didn't choose me to run. Ethan took a breath. And he chose the stand of the last warlord. Ethan turned away from Varzun. "I'm staying." Varzun's glowing white eyes narrowed. "Then you will die." Ethan lifted the stolen pulse rifle and fired at Varzun's feet. "Go then. Take your fleet and hide." "But I'm not running." The queen's lips curled slightly, as if she had expected this all along. The warrior laughed, gripping her blade tighter. Varzun studied Ethan in silence, then finally spoke. "So be it, warlord." Without another word, he turned and vanished, stepping into a teleportation field that blinked out of existence. A moment later, his fleet in orbit began to move, leaving Ethan and the others behind. Ethan turned to the queen and warrior. "Now what?" The queen nodded toward the syndicate's warships above. "Now we show them why Xalfar chose you." Ethan inhaled deeply, then lifted his communicator. "To all remaining warlords, this is your last chance. Fight with me or die here as cowards." The silence on the comms stretched for what felt like eternity. Then one voice responded. "For Xalfar. For war." Another joined in. Then another. Until suddenly, the remnants of Xalfar's warriors, the scattered, exiled, broken soldiers hiding in this sanctuary, answered the call. For war. Ethan's heart pounded as the energy of the moment surged through him. This was it. His first real battle. The last battle for the sanctuary. The moment the first syndicate troop transports landed, Ethan and his warriors opened fire. The cavernous ruins became a war zone. The queen moved like a ghost, her hands weaving deadly violet energy through the air, cutting down enemy soldiers in bursts of raw power. The warrior was a storm of destruction, blades flashing, her laughter cutting through the battlefield like a song of war. And Ethan fought. For the first time, he wasn't just surviving. He wasn't reacting. He was leading. "Hold the line," he shouted into his comm. "Pin them in the tunnels. Use the ruins for cover. Deploy the seismic charges," the queen ordered. "I'm going to kill everything. They to movies." The warrior howled in excitement. Explosions tore through the ground as Ethan's forces used the ruins to their advantage, forcing the syndicate's troops into narrow choke points. For a moment, it looked like they were winning. Until the sky split open. The Hollow Ones arrive. A dark, unnatural energy crackled in the sky above as a syndicate flagship descended. And then they emerged. The Hollow Ones. Ethan saw them drop from the ship like shadows given form. They didn't walk. They floated, their bodies twisted, their eyes burning with something unnatural. They weren't just syndicate leaders. They were something else. The battle shifted instantly. "Do not let them touch you," the Queen shouted, for the first time sounding truly afraid. Ethan saw why. One of the Hollow Ones reached for a warrior nearby, and the moment they made contact, the warrior's entire body withered and collapsed into dust. Shit! Ethan barely ducked as one of them lunged toward him. They weren't fighting a normal enemy. They were fighting a force beyond life. The warlord's gambit. Ethan's mind raced. He had no hope of beating these things in a straight fight. But maybe he didn't have to. His comm crackled to life. "Seismic charges ready, warlord." The bombs they had planted. The ruins were already unstable. Ethan looked around. The battlefield. The Hollow Ones. The shattered remains of an empire that once ruled the stars. And he made his call. EV-1, fall back to the EXIKs. Now. The Queen's eyes widened. "Ethan, what are you?" "Blow the sanctuary. Bury them, alive." The warrior let out a wild laugh. "Now you're talking." The Queen hesitated, then finally nodded. "Detonating in 10 seconds. Ethan ran, dodging debris, dodging death itself as the Hollow Ones howled behind him. 5 seconds. He saw the exit. The light of the battlefield blinded him. Now. The world exploded. The rise of the last warlord. The ruins collapsed into the abyss, taking the Hollow Ones with them. The ground shuddered, smoke and fire rising into the sky. Ethan lay on his back, gasping for breath. They had done it. They had won. The remaining warriors gathered around him, their eyes no longer doubtful. They had come here to die. But Ethan had made them fight, and he had won. The Queen stood over him, her expression unreadable. "You made your choice, warlord." The warrior sat beside him, grinning. "You're finally starting to act like one of us." Ethan let out a breathless laugh. Maybe he was. He had come into this war unwilling. Now he was a part of it, and as he looked up at the sky, he realized something. This was just the beginning. Epilogue. The next war begins. Days later, Ethan stood on the bridge of his new warship. The remnants of Salfar's fleet had rallied to him, and in the darkness beyond, the Hollow Syndicate was preparing for war. Ethan stared into the vastness of space, knowing what came next. The Syndicate wasn't done. The Hollow Ones would return. But this time, he wouldn't be running. "Set a course," Ethan commanded. "We're taking the fight to them." And the last warlord rose.